Right, so as we heard just now from Indonesia's finance minister, Indonesia's tax revenues have exceeded their target, reaching 100% of the target this year. I'm still joined by the director of Celios, Bhima Yudhistira. Bhima, what is your take on this, and how does this reflect on Indonesia's economic growth and recovery this year?
Yeah, first we need to appreciate the Ministry of Finance especially because the target is well achieved, more than 100% of the tax revenue. But we must be aware that the increasing number of the target and realizations of the tax revenue contribute mostly from the commodity booming, from the windfall, from the bonanza commodity. Let's assume that the coal price increased because of the energy crisis in the Europe caused by the Ukraine war. But the big question is how we can handle such a high target in the next years with the different conditions, with the different situations. Because of the commodity will be more moderate, the price will be slightly relatively lower. For instance, we see that the oil price right now is below $80 per barrel for the average crude price. I think this is impacting all of the tax revenue next years. And we assume that the government acknowledges these conditions and lowering a little bit the tax revenue target, because there will be like a different choice, whether we want to increase our economic growth or stay in the positive, like the government target economic growth of 5%, or stimulate with the tax revenue that increase. So there will be like a very hard choice from the government, giving a lot of the incentive, or we see that the tax revenue increase. That cannot be done within like the same thing. So I think the next year's tax managements or tax revenue targets will be lowering a little bit, give a lot of the fiscal incentive for the business and also for the small, medium enterprise and consumers also. I think that will be benefit for overall economy.
Right. So in that regard, how do you forecast Indonesia's tax revenues for next year? Will they still be substantial, especially since, as you mentioned, much of it this year was due to high commodity prices? Of course, there's a potential global slowdown in demand next year. How do you see tax revenues in Indonesia in 2023, Bhima?
Yeah, I think the target from the government of the tax revenue is still overshoot. So the government need to adjust, and we need to see that 30% of the total tax revenue is coming from manufacturing sectors. So to be able to increase the tax base, tax ratio, the government need to increase also the stimulus package for the manufacturing sectors. And now we see many of the manufacturing sectors may hit with the global recession rates from the export-oriented manufacturers in the textile, in the clothing, apparel industries, many of the industry related to the export-oriented, that need to be helped first. And then that in the automatic way, that the increase of the manufacturing sectors, I think they will contribute to the increasing of the tax revenue next year. That's the key of the success of the tax revenue.
All right, the key is manufacturing, according to Celios and you as well as its director. Now, I want to talk to you about the state budget deficit. Indonesia's state budget deficit just recently announced was much smaller than the threshold. The deficit was at 1.22% of GDP, much lower than the threshold of 4.5% of GDP. And this comes even as Indonesia had to deal with higher fuel subsidies and spending for recovery. What's your take of Indonesia's smaller deficit? And just explain, how did we achieve this?
I do believe that there's two things in common. The first one, we see that even though the government revenue target is above 100% of the achievement, which is good. However, from the expenditure side, many of the ministers, many of the institutions, many of the local government, they try to little bit slowing down the process of doing the contract, procurement kind of things. So therefore, the budget absorptions or realization is relatively still low, less than 90% from the last figures shown by the Ministry of Finance. I think that's kind of a problematic. So before and after the pandemic, the cycles or the cycles of local government expenditure still the same. I think that's need a major corrections. And the second thing is, I do believe that this is kind of a government strategy that decreasing the deficit because they try to save fund or money as possible from the tax revenue to financing next year's. Why they need to financing next year's? Because of the higher interest rate and lower appetite from the foreign investors to buy the Indonesian securities bond. So the government bond will be very challenging to issue next year due to the external conditions. Therefore, the government tried to squeeze the deficit budget, and they have some room, fiscal room, for spending more next year.
Right. So in that regard, do you feel that Indonesia's state budget right now is in an optimum condition to face the challenges of next year?
I don't think so, because the government budgets have a portion of around 7 to 8% of the total GDP. So therefore, the government budget is part of the stimulus actually. Stimulus not only give incentive of tax, but also speed up the process of procurement, especially for the small medium enterprise in the local level. I think that can increase the multiplier effect of the labor absorption. So therefore, the governments must see that they need to increase the management of the central and local government budget procurement. We hope that next year the cycles of the government budget will be better on.
All right, Bhima Yudhistira, Director of Celios think tanks, thank you so much for your insights this afternoon.
Thank you.